Sir Patrick Stewart, congratulations on the outstanding box office and reviews for your new film, Logan. So many people are calling this not only one of the best superhero films ever made, but one of the best films of the year, period. I know we still got a long way to go with the year as is, but when you hear that kind of praise for this movie, how does that make you feel? Did you know that you were making something that outstanding when you were making it?
We knew that we were making something very different. This is my 7th appearance in an X-Men Wolverine movie. And I had never, ever had any anticipation of having such a long relationship with this franchise. Given that at the end of the 3rd movie, I was vaporized by Jean Grey, which was quite uncomfortable. And then it would appear that after Days of Future Past, that something bad happened at the end of that movie. Anyway, here we are, Logan and Charles, living somewhere south of the Mexican border, close to El Paso, living in squalid conditions. Charles dressed in dirty pajamas, sleeping in a nasty old bed, and Logan driving a clapped out limo in order to make money to keep Charles in his medications. This is nothing like the X-Men we have seen before. Logan himself is old and tired, weary, wants rest. His healing is not working, and he's in trouble, having difficulties. So I was captured by that idea of a new vision of where these two leaders of the X-Men might possibly end up, given that we know very early on in the movie, the other X-Men are gone. Now, we never quite learn what that means. There was a script draft early on when that was more explicit, but I think it was perfectly right that it was left somewhat unresolved. Please, by the way, forgive my voice. I've been talking now for 3 weeks about Logan, and although I haven't had enough, my voice very nearly has. So I was so excited by this from the beginning. I talked very early on in the process with James, our director, and what he had to say was interesting and exciting, with challenges attached to it as well. What first hooked me into the script was actually not my first scene, although the first scene that I have with Logan, which comes very early in the movie, is a brilliantly written and filmed scene. It was the description of the location that hooked me. What the heck is this guy doing, living in an upturned tank on an abandoned petrochemical factory somewhere near Juarez? I was hooked right away. And when it came to turning up in Louisiana last May, I knew that I was on the edge of doing something very unusual and hopefully very satisfying. And that's how it proved. We knew that we were doing something different. The reassurance was that Hugh and James Mangold, who had been the two original inspirers of this storyline, and of course there is a comic book, Old Man Logan, which is referenced to, they were determined that they would do something quite out of the ordinary, that would certainly not be in what we're now beginning to see as the very familiar, customary, conventional vocabulary of superhero movies. And that's what we've made. It's extremely unusual. I mean, where else in a superhero movie do you get perhaps the most pivotal scene of the movie, somewhere in the middle, where it's just 6 nice people having a pleasant dinner around a small farmhouse dinner table somewhere in the American West. And then, of course, something very savage and brutal happens. But this is unconventional. And the film has received such a positive response, particularly as a movie worth seeing, just as much as being yet another one in a very familiar genre.
And you've been working with Hugh Jackman. You've both been playing these roles since that first X-Men movie back in 2000. So going on almost 2 decades now. And of course you two have that very familial rapport in this film. Did all those years, kind of growing these roles and developing these roles with each other, make it easier to develop that bond for this film?
Oh yes, no doubt. But then Hugh and I have similar backgrounds. We're both theater actors. That's where we come from. When I first heard of Hugh Jackman, he was playing the leading male role in Sunset Boulevard in Melbourne, Australia, being directed by a good friend of mine. Then he came to London to play Curly in Oklahoma at the Royal National Theatre. So we both know what it's like to work in companies for long times, long periods of time. And I've always loved that. I've always loved the idea of the ensemble. And that's what we were. The first X-Men movie, well, we had Halle Berry and Anna Paquin, Academy Award winners. We had Ian McKellen, Academy Award nominee. We had James Marsden and a great group of actors, but there was no lead as such. We were an ensemble. Of course, out of that, due to Hugh's strength and talent and the interest in his character, became the centerpiece of the franchise. But to work with someone that you've known for 17 years and known not just as a colleague, but as a very dear friend, makes a huge difference. If only because there exists a large measure of trust. And when you feel safe, surrounded by your fellow actors, now by safe, I don't mean cozy, because this film was anything but cozy, except perhaps that one scene that I've mentioned. There is a potential to do your best work because you can take risks. You can be dangerous. You can be what you've perhaps never been before. And you will have support and encouragement, as I felt I had playing this very different Charles for James and with Hugh, and of course, the phenomenal, and I do not use that word lightly, Dafne Keen. I'm sorry, if only I have one failing in my personality, is that I give long answers to questions.
It's much better than short answers, believe us. Going off of that, with this long relationship with Hugh and now with this little girl in the film, this film, more so than I think the other X-Men films, really stresses the father-son dynamic between Logan and Professor Xavier, and now with this young girl, there's a grandfatherly quality to him. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yes. Again, it is another aspect of the original impact of this film. It is a family movie. In fact, there are 2 families in the movie, one of whom we don't spend much time with. But clearly, for many years, Charles has represented a father figure to Logan, although I don't think he was too happy to accept that role of being son. But Logan and Charles always had a special relationship. Charles knew about Logan's past. He knew where he came from. He knew the pain, the suffering that he'd experienced and how hard it was for him to lead a life. Logan didn't always like having someone with that understanding. But despite the fact that Logan was never an easy man to deal with, Charles persisted because he cared deeply for him. What is so beautiful about aspects of this movie is how those roles are now reversed. Charles is the difficult one, moody, confused, angry, almost violent at times, unwell, and as we discover, potentially highly dangerous, not just to those close to him, but to the whole world around him, because he has lost control of his powers. He has seizures which he cannot control and which create mayhem in the outside world. So now Logan is looking after his one-time boss, and they have a very, very special relationship. And into that relationship comes an 11-year-old child who is quickly identified as being X-23. In other words, a manufactured individual. And although she's uncomfortable company, nevertheless, Charles cares passionately about her and that we should take care of her and try to save her. Very reluctantly, Logan joins that team. And suddenly, this superhero movie becomes a road movie. And the three of us are first in the banged up limo, and then after that in a crappy truck for days, trying to make their way to a supposed refuge, and encountering all kinds of incidents and adventures along the way. And they become a threesome, although it's a long, long time before X-29 ever speaks to us. She nevertheless becomes an integral part of our group. And because, in practical terms, the filming of the movie, we were, those long road sequences in the truck were filmed outside Natchez, close to the Mississippi-Louisiana border. Quite tough weather conditions. At that time of year, it was June. We spent a lot of time shut up in that truck. The air conditioning sucked. We had to have the windows up because of noise. And we couldn't often get out of the trucks because there were cameras on the doors and so forth. So we had to make our own entertainment. And that was one of the highlights of the movie. We sang songs, we played word games, we had quizzes, we talked seriously. Hugh and I talked seriously with Dafne about acting, about being a performer. It was a marvelous time. And so there were two families being built, the family of actors inside the truck and the family brought together by Logan and Charles in the movie.
One of the interesting aspects of the X-Men series up to this point, has been, it's always kind of stood in for the experiences of being the other, these mutants who can, can be a metaphor for any number of experiences, like being gay or being a minority or being an immigrant. And this film takes that premise and moves it forward to a near future that's very, very dire for mutant kind. Do you think these stories have an even more special significance now than they even did at the beginning?
No question. This project was conceived probably 4 years ago, when the situation in North America, as in Europe, was very different. As an English citizen and a long 30-year resident alien of the United States, I have profound anxiety about where Europe is going. And the British government's decision, supported by a questionable referendum, to leave the European Union is, in my opinion, calamitous. A Europe which for most of the 20th century had been at war in one way or another. First World War, Second World War, the Balkans, Greece, finally came together in an extraordinary collaboration of nations to create the Union. And now we're leaving it for what we think is something better. Well, it won't be. And here in the United States, we have an administration which is unsettling. And that's a deliberate understatement because I'm not a citizen of the US. It's a case, I think, of life catching up with art. These movies have always been about issues of otherness, being different. And whatever that otherness is, it requires understanding, compassion, sympathy. Something which currently seems to be sadly lacking, not just in Europe and North America, but all around the world. Our movies have always had that at the center of their storylines. And now it could not be more pertinent than it is in Logan. I mean, just take the border storyline for one of them. We get out of Mexico into Texas and begin a long road trip, south to north across the United States. We encounter others along the way who are also trying to get to a border, and most importantly, to be able to cross it to safety. Well, I don't have to speak about the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of desperate individuals, families, single men and women, children, single children traveling alone who are in that situation. So there are references that this film makes, which I don't think could ever have been intended to make in such a powerful fashion as they do. But they're there for people to pay attention to or not.
And this film really does push this genre of filmmaking into more mature territory. I mean, we keep talking about this scene in the farmhouse, and that's the kind of scene that would not be in the middle of a big early spring action film. Do you think these films do have the potential to, I don't want to say elicit change, but open dialogue through entertainment?
From the beginning of my career over 55 years ago, I have always believed in the power of art to change the world. I know that sounds ambitious and probably naive, but it is, I think, along with entertainment, of course, which is our primary duty. First and foremost, we must entertain. Excuse me. But I remember once, some long time ago, a couple of decades ago, I was doing a one-man stage show based on Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. And a dear friend came to see it and said, I wish you could see the looks on the faces of the audience when they arrive in the theater and see the looks on their faces when they leave, because you've changed how the way they feel. I tell this story with as much modesty as I can command, but along with all the other nice things that were said about that and the nominations and so forth, that was the comment that pleased me most, because Charles Dickens meant to change how people perceived poverty in London, distress, cruelty, the prisons and so forth. He made his point. And also, more than anything else, he was making a point in Christmas Carol that it is never, ever too late to change.
Well, this is a great movie, and congratulations on it. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure getting to talk to you.
Oh, thank you. This was very enjoyable. And again, apologies for my creaky voice.
Oh, no, you sound perfectly fine.
Thank you. And by the way, to everybody else, Ginger says hi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.